November 5, 2024. The results are in, and Donald Trump has secured the presidency once again. While social media platforms erupt in outrage and pundits on major news networks fumble through electoral maps, trying to explain the shift, there is a different perspective to consider, one that is not rooted in panic, but in prophecy. If we view this event through a spiritual and historical lens, the return of Donald Trump is not a disruption of the divine plan, but a necessary component of it. This moment was never about saving America in the traditional sense. It was about revealing the true nature of the nation. It is a process of exposure, a pulling back of the veneer to display the infection underneath, forcing a confession from a society that has long hidden its true character behind the performance of tolerance and the language of progress. To believe that the divine would not utilize a figure like Trump is to misunderstand the historical precedents found in Scripture. History is replete with examples of unlikely figures used to execute divine will. Pharaoh was used to reveal hardness of heart. Nebuchadnezzar was used for discipline. Cyrus, a pagan king, was used to fulfill prophecy. Therefore, it is entirely consistent that a figure with a controversial past, a real estate empire, and a history of bankruptcy could be utilized to expose the heart of a nation built on complex and painful foundations. Consider the historical record that is often omitted from standard curriculums. In 1776, concurrent with the Declaration of Independence, a group of enslaved Africans in Massachusetts filed the first freedom petition to the colonial legislature. They argued based on natural law and the inherent contradiction of a revolution fought for liberty, while maintaining chattel slavery. The petition was ignored, not debated, but dismissed, because the revolution was designed to secure freedom for a specific demographic, not the entire population. This distinction has served as the operating system of the country for centuries. Trump did not invent this system. He simply removed the pretense that it does not exist. There is a distinct cyclical pattern in American history regarding the economic and political independence of Black Americans. Whenever significant progress is made, a systemic reset occurs. Following the end of slavery in 1865, Reconstruction was dismantled by 1877, removing Black politicians from office. When Black Wall Street thrived in Tulsa during the 1920s, it was destroyed in 1921. Following the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, the 1970s saw the initiation of the war on drugs, which decimated leadership structures and led to mass incarceration. Following the election of Barack Obama in 2008, the pendulum swung sharply. Back in 2016, this is not coincidence. It acts as a binding covenant against the marginalized. This brings us to a critical diagnostic tool, the support base, the correlation between white evangelical Christianity and the Trump presidency offers a profound theological revelation. In 2016, 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. In 2020, that number remained high at 76%. Despite the events of January 6th and various legal indictments, the support has only solidified. This demographic, which spent decades preaching character, the sanctity of marriage and moral leadership, has aligned itself with a figure who antithetically opposes those stated values. This suggests that the theology in operation was perhaps never centered on the Christ of the Beatitudes, but rather on the preservation of power and cultural hegemony. This alignment has exposed the reality of the institution by supporting policies that disenfranchise the vulnerable, while claiming the banner of faith. A choice has been made that mirrors the biblical narrative of Esau selling his birthright or Edom standing by while Jacob was attacked. The scripture in Obadiah warns against standing idle while one's brother is subjected to violence, yet this has been the recurring dynamic between the white evangelical establishment and the Black Christian community. The political alliance with Trump allows for the mask to be fully removed, revealing that the priority is the maintenance of a kingdom that reflects a specific cultural image, rather than a universal kingdom of heaven. However, the exposure is not limited to one demographic. It also reveals the internal compromises within the Black community. The figures willing to collaborate with systems of oppression for personal gain, the prosperity gospel that ignores systemic injustice, and the desire to integrate into a structure designed for exclusion. This moment forces a binary choice. One cannot serve two masters. The attempt to assimilate into a system that requires the erasure of one's identity is no longer viable. The separation of the wheat from the chaff is currently underway, distinguishing those who are performing for an audience from those who are building for a future. Economically, the data is stark. The tax cuts enacted during the first term transferred approximately $1.5 trillion to the wealthiest Americans, exacerbating a wealth gap where Black household wealth has seen a decline for 7 consecutive decades. This is not merely an economic policy, it is wealth extraction. The labor and innovation of the marginalized continue to fuel a system where ownership remains elusive. The solution to this entrenched disparity is unlikely to be found in the voting booth alone, but in the construction of parallel economies. The call is for an exodus mindset, not necessarily a physical relocation, but a withdrawal of dependence on external validation and economic structures. The concept of the 400 years is significant here. From 1619 to 2019 marks a 4-century cycle of enslavement and struggle. The societal fracturing we are witnessing is the expiration of that timeline. The chaos is not a sign of defeat, but of a system in its final desperate throes. Just as the Israelites were refined by the pressures of Egypt, the current generation is being prepared through these trials. The perceived losses, the gentrification of neighborhoods, the disparity in justice are the catalysts for a necessary separation. History provides a roadmap for what was stolen. The Southern Homestead Act of 1866 was intended to open 46 million acres of public land to freedmen. Through bureaucratic sabotage and violence, the act was repealed by 1876, and 90% of that land went to white applicants. Today, that land represents trillions of dollars in generational wealth. The resistance to reparations is effectively a resistance to confession. Acknowledging the debt would require a restructuring of society that the beneficiaries of the current system are unwilling to entertain. This mirrors the biblical jubilee, a reset of debt and land ownership every 50 years, which America has never practiced. The immediate reaction to the 2024 election results highlights the divergence in worldviews. We see the fracturing of congregations, where the platitudes of trusting God are no longer sufficient for those facing existential threats. We are seeing the rise of independent worship and community, structures that do not rely on traditional hierarchies or 501c3 statuses. This is the future: small, agile, spirit-led communities that are disconnected from the political idolatry of the empire. We must also scrutinize the legal architecture. In 1873, the slaughterhouse cases gutted the 14th Amendment. 140 years later, in 2013, Shelby County v. Holder gutted the Voting Rights Act. The closure of over 1,600 polling places in predominantly minority communities between 2013 and 2024 is the direct result. The voter suppression tactics, strict ID laws, purging of rolls are modern iterations of historical disenfranchisement. The drop in voter turnout in some areas was not apathy. It was exhaustion. Yet this exhaustion must be transmuted into a cry for deliverance, similar to the cry that initiated the biblical Exodus. Looking forward, the policy blueprints are clear. Documents like Project 2025 outline a methodical dismantling of the federal bureaucracy, the elimination of the Department of Education, and the shifting of civil rights enforcement to the states. This is a strategic move to privatize education and create a permanent underclass. By controlling the curriculum, one controls the historical narrative, teaching future generations that systemic racism is a myth and that the current hierarchy is the natural order. This is the long game, building an empire that persists even after the current leader is gone. The theological malpractice that enables this relies on a misapplication of Romans 13, demanding submission to governing authorities without context. It ignores that submission to Nero, a tyrant, was a survival strategy, not an endorsement of his divinity. The modern alignment of the church with political power is a repetition of the error of the golden calf. It is the worship of the nation and the flag over the mandates of Scripture. The consequences are evident in the rising rates of despair, addiction, and violence within the very communities that claim this supremacy. This exposure extends to the collaborators, the Supreme Court justices, the tech billionaires, the corporate entities that profit from polarization. It is a revelation of the entire ecosystem of power. For Black America, specifically, it is a revelation of the futility of seeking a seat at a table that was never set for them. The strategy of pragmatism and moderating tone has proven ineffective. The only path forward is to build independent institutions. Consider the example of the collective in Georgia that purchased 96 acres of farmland in 2023. They are not merely buying dirt, they are securing legacy. By utilizing legal covenants to prevent the sale of the land for 7 generations, they are ensuring that their descendants have a base of operation that cannot be gentrified. This is economic exodus. It addresses the reality that the wealth gap, which would take over 2 centuries to close at current rates, will not be fixed by the system that created it. The policies proposed for the coming term, mass deportations, tariffs, cuts to social safety nets, are designed to solidify the current power structure. The cruelty is the point. It signals to the base that the right people are being targeted. But for the targeted, this is the signal to leave the burning house. The instruction in Matthew 10, to shake the dust off your feet, is a directive to stop negotiating with a system that refuses to acknowledge your humanity. The timing of the inauguration in January 2025, falling within the biblical calendar's cycles, suggests a period of wilderness. The wilderness is not punishment. It is a detox. It is where the slave mentality is purged. The danger is that, like the Israelites, there will be a temptation to complain about the difficulty of freedom and romanticize the predictability of bondage. The test of this next era is whether the community can build its own tabernacle in the wild, creating systems of education, food security, and commerce that do not rely on the empire. Notably, the voting data from 2024 shows that Black women were the only demographic where the president-elect lost ground. This group has consistently acted as the firewall of democracy, possessing a discernment that cuts through the political noise. The divide that is opening up between genders, classes, and generations within the Black community is being weaponized by political actors. However, the solution remains unity and purpose. The grifters and those seeking proximity to power will be discarded when their usefulness expires. The only safety lies in solidarity with one's own community. The question that remains is, what are you building? Consuming content and expressing outrage are not construction. Building involves buying land, homeschooling children with accurate history, learning biblical languages to bypass colonial translations, and establishing businesses that circulate the dollar within the community. Politics is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of theology. If the theology dictates that you are chosen, you will build like royalty. If it dictates you are cursed, you will build like a subordinate. We are witnessing the slow collapse of an unsustainable empire. The environmental crises, the social unrest, and the economic instability are the plagues of the modern era. The systems are cannibalizing themselves. The wealthy are preparing bunkers because they see the inevitable correction. For the marginalized, the return of Trump is the final warning that the system cannot be reformed from within. We end not with despair, but with a decision. You stand at a crossroads. You can continue to petition a system designed to ignore you, or you can accept that the system is working as intended and choose to outlive it. You can teach your children to assimilate, or you can teach them that they descend from architects, mathematicians, and astronomers who thrived before the current empires existed. Trump's presidency is the clarification required to force this choice. It is the moment the Red Sea is visible and the only option is to move forward. When you begin to build, when you create value that they cannot tax, joy they cannot legislate, and community they cannot regulate, you cease to be concerned with who sits in the Oval Office. You are building a kingdom that outlasts the election cycle. This is the activation. This is the moment where the ancestral memory kicks in. The mask is off, the truth is plain, and the permission to stop performing and start building has been granted. The only remaining question is whether you will spend the next 4 years looking back at what was lost, or looking forward to what must be built.